10 o'clock, and the commissioners are all gathered. So we'll go ahead and get started. My name's Nancy DePel. I'm the regulatory law judge presiding over this presentation today. We're here for a working group EW-2023-0199. That is in the matter of a collaborative workshop for customer education and outreach regarding the introduction of default time of use rates by Evergy Metro, Inc., doing business as Evergy Missouri Metro, and Evergy Missouri West, Inc., doing business as Evergy Missouri West. So we set this time for a presentation by Evergy regarding its education and outreach and so forth for its time of use rates. We would normally have this kind of a presentation in the agenda room, but we thought so more people could be present and hear what's going on, that we would set these presentations in this manner. So it's less formal than a hearing. Evergy's been asked to do a presentation. They filed their slides that they intend to give today. I will ask if any of the other stakeholders would like to make comments at the end. And the commissioners may have questions as you go. But this is not a contested proceeding, so I would ask that everyone else remain quiet and not interrupt. If you have any cell phones or electronic devices, I would ask that you please mute those. And at the end, if there are additional remarks or questions or something from the other parties present, you can let me know. And commissioners, like I say, if you have questions as things go, this is as like one of your normal agenda meetings. Feel free to jump in. We have Commissioner Holzman and Commissioner Kolkmeyer online. And so there may be a slight delay. If commissioners, if you need to jump in, go ahead. And we have the chairman and Commissioner Hahn here in the room, and I expect Commissioner Coleman will be here before we get really rolling. So, commissioners, did you have anything that you needed to bring up before we got started? Not seeing anything. All right then. We can go ahead. I'll let Evergy begin. Mr. Fisher, did you?
Thank you, Judge. For the record, it's Jim Fisher with the law firm of Fisher and Doherty, PC, and our contact information is already in the case. I have with me today Chuck Casely and Katie McDonald, who I think you are well familiar with since they've given previous presentations on this topic. And at the appropriate time, I'd like to just turn it over to Mr. Casely and let him go through the slides and hand off as needed.
You can go right ahead.
Mr. Casely.
Thank you, Judge. Get the slides pulled up here. Okay. Good morning, Mr. Chairman, Commissioners. It's a pleasure to be back here again. We're going to give a little bit of an overview as to where we are with time of use rates implementation. As in the past, we're going to split this up, and I'm going to give a brief kind of overview as to where we are with the implementation and kind of the status today. And then my colleague, Katie McDonald, will cover customer education and awareness, as well as kind of what our ongoing strategy is going to look like. And then, of course, we'd both be willing to answer any questions that the Commission has. So I'm going to start with what proactive engagement ended up looking like with our Missouri residential customers. We had just over 155,000 Missouri residential customers proactively enroll in time of use rates. This occurred between essentially June of 2023, or this year, and ending around the middle of October, when we started transitioning first in Metro and then in West automatically to the default rate for customers who had not selected a rate. That 155,000 customers is just under 30%. It's about 28.5% or so of our Missouri residential customer base. To give you some context, when we first started looking at this transition and how we were going to approach it, we talked to Guidehouse, we talked to Navigant, we talked to eSource, and engaged with Brattle, all to get an expectation of, given their expertise across the United States, what we could expect for proactive enrollment in time of use rates if we were to go out and market them aggressively. And what they said is, taking all states into consideration, so this is nationwide, Guidehouse, Navigant, and eSource all said 1 to 3% is about what you would expect. Brattle was a little more aggressive, saying that they would expect around the 3%, as a threshold, and that actually they pointed to Arizona, where there were default time of use rates implemented, and they saw just under a 20% adoption proactively of a specific time of use rate, but that occurred over about a 2-year period. So 30% would be, from what we can tell and talking to other consultants active in the energy and electric space, is the high water mark nationwide for, as a percentage of customers adopting time of use, and in particular over a 5-month period. Of the folks who self-selected, about 41% overall selected the low differential, or what ended up being the default plan at the end of the day. And about 2%, and the two-part plan ended up at about 36%. Overall. Now, this is of the pre-selected group, the folks who are proactive, so of the 155,000. One of the things that you will notice on this slide is that there is a differential between Missouri West and Missouri Metro. We're going to do more research on this with customers now that they're settled into their rates and we have some time to engage with them. But we think that people choosing a higher amount, choosing the two-part summer peak or the higher differential, is probably related to the higher density, younger, smaller apartment condominium living, and just younger and higher concentrations of younger and kind of younger professionals who grew up in the digital era. So that's of the proactively selected folks. If you go to the next slide, this is where we sit as of November 27th. We are at almost entirely adopted now, meaning or transitioned to time of use rates. Of the 555, we're right at 547, and I think over the next week to 10 days, we should conclude all of the transitioning to time of use rates. Overall, 83% are on the default or the low differential plan, with about 10% on the summer 2 peak plan. I think the big takeaway from here really is that it all went very smoothly. We expected to be working on this right up until the end of December, but we had digital tools in place to do this migration by bill cycle, and it all ended up going very smoothly. We didn't have any real hiccups, and so we accelerated to the extent that we could and got this done, which will create some time, at the end of the year to kind of step back and make sure everything has gone the right way and see if there's anything else we want to do before we close the books on 2023. One of the questions that we have received quite a bit is, what happened to the customers and how are customers responding who are on the average pay plan? And if you look at slide 6, what you'll see is we have not had a large decline in customers that were on the average pay plan and then enrolled in time of use rates. From middle June till about middle August, we actually had, we did not have the ability to automatically move customers who are on the average pay plan if they proactively changed their rate. That tool had not been completed and tested yet we wanted to be able to have people in mid-June be able to start to switch. So what occurred is about 3,500 or so customers who proactively selected during that time period ended up having to come back and take some manual action or interact with us to get put back on average pay plan. But a significant number did. And so as we sit here today, the vast majority of who are on the average pay plan when we started to implement time of use rates remain today. In fact, just under 93%. For those customers who are not, first of all, there's some normal churn that occurs with the average pay plan, and that could be somebody broke a payment arrangement. It could be, we got not a high number, but we've got some systemic folks who will unenroll seasonally, meaning they will be in it when their rates are high and then get out of it when their rates are lower, and or their usage rather, so seasonally. And then, we have some folks who change address or move, and so that number fluctuates some anyway. But of the, 4,800 to 5,000 or so that are not on that were previously, we're going to continue to reach out to them through email and phone calls and say, hey, do you want to get back on this? But so far, we haven't seen a large issue with this. In August, we did have a tool that would migrate you automatically, and since August, September, and October is when the bulk of folks actually made the change. That just wasn't a big impact on average pay plan.
Chuck, can I ask a question?
Yes, sir.
So the total number of Evergy customers that are on a payment plan is 58?
No, that's
49, 125?
that's it is. It's 49,125 plus 4880. So that would be right around 55,000, 56,000, something like that.
And so and is that roughly the same as what you saw before TOU rates?
Yes.
And how does that compare? How does your level of ADP or budget billing or whatever you want to call it, how does that compare to other utilities of your size? Is that a kind of a...
It's right where you would expect it to be. It's plus or minus 5% or so. It's not meaningfully different. We have higher penetrations of text messaging, email accounts, online accounts are generally higher than the industry average, but average pay plan, it's about where you would expect from an industry perspective.
All right, thank you.
Yep. Another one of the interesting questions we've had and much discussed in agenda meetings, I think, Mr. Chairman, you've brought it up several times, actually, is rate switching and the ability to go back and forth. And this is just a snapshot of, what we would call our rate switchers as of the beginning of November. You can see there are, I wouldn't say a high number, but there are, our biggest concentration is of folks who make a selection and then see communication of another kind or go back in and re-engage in the portal and decide, maybe this isn't for me, I want to change. We're going to look to see if we can quantify from the data where those switches were to occur. We have not been able to isolate that yet. We're going to see if we can. My suspicion is a lot of this probably occurred around the time that we had discussion of switching the default rate, and that conversation in the media probably drove some folks to say, maybe I will switch to that default rate if that's where, that's where we're going to set it. But we have not, that's just a guess. We haven't ascertained that yet. We are going to try and find that out.
Chuck, so what's going through your mind when you see a customer that's had 10 rate changes? I mean, how is this happening? Every day, What's the story there?
Well, there's only one in Missouri Metro, and actually, I wonder what's going on in their mind. But what's going on in my mind when I look at the slide overall is folks having persistent anxiety, meaning changing and changing and changing again. That just isn't occurring. I think when I see overall this slide is that people are settling in to this and are going to give the rates a try. I think the other thing is, I do think that just the amount, and we'll talk about this here in just a little bit, but the amount of information that has come out, if you're an engaged person or if you made a choice but you weren't super convicted in it and then you get additional information, I think you're seeing some people go back in and say, oh, well, that's new information. Maybe I should change. And I think it was just a very new concept. And so we expect some churn. I think this over time will we will see some people who systemically do it. But I think mostly people are going to settle into their rates and be okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner.
So if you're looking at 100, so this is not broken down between the 155 that made a proactive choice. This is just everybody that is.
That's
current.
right.
So the number of people, you've had 8,000 roughly people that have made a rate
Do
change.
it once, yeah.
So that's out of your customer base of 550, that's pretty,
Yeah, a little over 10%.
Yeah.
I mean, it's minuscule. Not 10%, 1%,
yeah.
sorry.
Right, yeah,
That's why I became a lawyer and not an engineer.
that's right.
That 1-0 difference makes a big difference.
Just a rounding error.
So if you go back.
Hey, Chuck, I have a question real quick.
Yes.
Out of that 8,000, how many of those do you think are going to be folks who were put into the default and then discovered they were in the default and decided to change into another plan versus having made a self-selection and then changed out of the self-selection that they previously had researched?
I don't know the answer to that, Commissioner, because I don't think we've been able to pull so far and sort for those who have made it and what time they made it and then when they came back and switched it. We're looking to see if that's a data pull that can be done rather easily. There are so many different variables here. It's oops, we're getting feedback now. It's difficult, but what I will tell you is, again, we feel like this is overall a very, very small number of folks who have even as of today, when this is brand new, made a switch from whatever they were defaulted into or from what they originally chose. But that's a good idea to really try and drive into that, and we'll see if we can look at the group of proactive versus transition to default, and see if we can sort that out.
So do you have data out of the 155,000 that self-selected? How many of those self-selected after the default went into effect?
Yes, and it's a really small group. It's maybe a couple of thousand. And if you look, I was going to say this proactively, but if you go back and you look between slides, let's see here, 4 and 5, you'll see that the numbers don't add perfectly. So you might say, well, I'm looking at one slide and I'm looking at the others, and when I looked at the enrolled numbers, they don't add perfectly. That's because after we cut off the proactively enrolled, meaning there's a point in time where we said we're starting to automatically transition now, we have had people either go back and switch, or we've had more likely before we got to their bill cycle, there's been a couple thousand customers who have gone out and proactively made a selection past that the cutoff date for the 155. So it hasn't been a huge number, but I mean, if we were to truly put a number on there, there's probably 157, 158,000 who proactively chose prior to when they got transitioned, with a couple thousand happening after we started transitioning customers, if that makes sense.
All right, thank you very much.
So on slide 8, this is an eye chart, and I don't propose to go through the entirety of this. I just want to point out a couple things. The first, above the gray line of months, is the timeline or process and the stakeholder interactions, the major stakeholder interactions that occurred. And below that gray line of months is the company's implementation milestones, the major milestones. what I really like to say about this is this is unusual for TOU, and it is unusual really for regulatory process and the commission process in general. If you think about it, the way the process usually works is we get an order or an approval for something, we implement, and then up to a year or two later, we come back and we take a look and we say, did this happen well? Was it effective? Was it prudent? Did it work? This has been a much more fluid process, and it has been very transparent. There have been lots of data requests, lots of meetings, lots of interactions between stakeholders, both at the regulatory process, non-regulatory, customers, media, both at the commission and here. And so, if you talk to customers, they know a lot about, relative to many other regulatory proceedings and processes, what happened here. They have, they have opinions about it. But I do think that having a working docket and having the feedback and making changes as we went along has actually led to a better outcome. And I think it has better served customers. And Katie will talk a little bit more in the future, or in the later part of this presentation, about some of the changes we actually have made, both to what we were doing and the implementation from feedback we've gotten from multiple sources. I also think the thing that probably sticks out to me about this as well is that we remain very convicted in our decision and glad that we waited to really start advertising and educating customers and creating awareness till we had a digital tool. If you think about, and again, Katie will address this a little bit more in her remarks, but if you think about the nature of time of use rates, it is inherently a digital thing. It is enabled by digital meters versus analog meters. It is enabled by automation that is digitally created through apps and Wi-Fi and cellular signals in the home. It is an inherently digital thing. We don't have time of use rates if we don't have a digital and a increasingly digital society. And so having a place where people could go and engage digitally ended up being the right decision and ended up being very important. In fact, in something we didn't necessarily expect, as I mentioned before, Chairman Roop, we already have a very high penetration relative to most peers of online or digital customers. It actually helped increase our digital footprint, and again, and enrollees in digital accounts. And Katie will talk a little bit more about that. Digital self-service is up. 90% of our interaction and enrollment proactively all occurred online with those tools.
Chuck, if you don't mind, before you go on, I
Yep.
just have a couple questions about some of the specifics in the timeline.
Yep.
So on the top seems to follow the trend of items that were going on at the commission, and below the line is Evergy campaign.
Yep.
And the top portion over October, and there's one kind of in between July and August. It says Evergy responds to either 13 requests or 24 data requests with many multiple subparts. Responses include numerous supporting files. Can you speak to if those were responses to the complaint case or if they're related to workshop requests?
Most of this, I believe, subject to verifying, most of this occurred prior to the complaint case and were data requests that came out of either informal conversations or workshops had with various parties. Obviously, with the complaint case, there will be subsequent data requests and things like that, and maybe some of the ones in October, I don't know, are responsive to that. But anything prior to October, it came from previous conversations and interactions.
Okay, one more question. The December timeline shows that Evergy is going to host a third TOU workshop with staff and OPC. I'm trying to wrap my mind around, is that supposed to be the stakeholder meeting and the forum for the stakeholder meeting? I'm assuming that may have come out of the order on TOU reporting. I'm trying to just understand, what the purpose of that particular workshop is intended to be.
I do think it came out of the order, Commissioner, and it is, if you think about it, in December, early December, we will wrap up transitioning everybody, and we're gonna have to start looking towards next year and how we interact with customers. What's the level of education, and ongoing interaction? And I do think that this will give all parties, all stakeholders, an opportunity to say, we like this, we didn't like this. As we're going into January, February, March of next year, here are things we want you to think about, knowing what we know now.
Okay, so this will be the forum for the stakeholder meeting?
Yeah.
Okay.
I would note that in the order directing time of use, customer choice, transitioning, and reporting, we are under an obligation to schedule another on the record in January of '24 and then in April of '24. I'm not familiar with that stakeholder specific meeting, but.
Thank you.
Okay, I am going to, I got 2 more slides and I'm gonna pass it to Katie. This is just a very, very high-level overview of kind of the time of use, penetration and, of the campaign, the education and awareness campaign, and marketing that was done. What I would say about this is a couple things. One, this is primarily from June to October. And in my 16, almost 17 years now at KCP&L, now Evergy, I haven't seen anything that approaches this in terms of awareness and penetration into our customer base, engagement, and media generated. Nothing in my memory comes close. Katie will get more engaged and talk about this a little more granularly when she talks about the campaign and the results. But what I would say again is with this kind of awareness and with this amount of attention being paid, when customers feel strongly about something, the very first thing they want to do is learn more and how it impacts them. Excuse me, this is what happens when you throw a party for 100,000 people on the plaza and are outside without a coat like your mother told you not to do on Thanksgiving. But what this says to me is, starting from the very beginning when there was awareness, we needed to have digital tools in place. Otherwise, the call center would have been overwhelmed. Otherwise, it would have been much more costly to respond to customer reaction, and overall customer experience would have been worse than what it was. I think all things considered, in the time frame that we were working with here, I think that at the end of the day, what's going to happen here is customers will transition into a rate. They will learn about it, and 6 months to a year from now, this will be a distant memory, is our hope. One of the things that we get asked a lot, and this is an exceptional question, an exceptional point to bring up, is, what about some segments of the population that are either more at risk or maybe perhaps not as digitally savvy? And so this is in response to some questions and feedback we've gotten specifically to take a look at some of those segments. If you look at, again, overall, we had around 155, 156,000 people proactively select. That's about 30% of the population of residential customers in Missouri. One of the things we heard is, please don't leave seniors behind. Please don't leave low-income customers behind. And if you look at that 155,000, approximately 30% are seniors. So there's no deviation from the general population reacting to this. In other words, they got information, they used it, and at the same rate, they enrolled as the rest of the population. You also see that just underneath seniors, and again, not very far off the population as a whole, are low-income customers that are residential in Missouri, enrolled at about 28% of that 155% of pre-enrolled customers. So we think that the events, the efforts that we made in those areas, if you go back to the previous page, we had 68 events targeted at seniors and low-income customers over the summer and fall. We think the targeted messaging that we did to those customers were effective. And again, most of these customers, the vast majority of these customers enrolled online and digitally. And, I was thinking about it over Thanksgiving. My parents just happened to be in. We think about seniors, at least I do. I think of seniors as my grandparents. And my grandparents certainly didn't have the digital technology that they do now. But my parents are 76 and 77. They're baby boomers, and they both were on their cell phones more over Thanksgiving than my teenage kids were. So I think seniors are using digital technology, and particularly when we interact with lower income customers at a lot of the events that we have, specifically targeting some of those more at-risk groups. We also see a very high penetration of cellular usage, cell phone usage within that population as well. So I think that shows up in the results here. The big message being that their enrollment did not deviate by any material perspective from the proactive enrollment of the rest of the population.
Hey, Chuck, before you go on.
Yep.
How do you guys define non-engaged customer?
So that is folks we don't have. So first of all, these are Axiom segments. We use a segmenting company, a national segmenting company, to take and match it back against our customer database. It creates something that's a little less subjective and what other utilities and companies use. But that's not digital, and that's people we don't have emails for. And so it's about 27% of our overall residential population, which is, again, relatively low compared to other companies. We really do have a vibrant interaction digitally and online.
Chuck, I also have a question.
Yep.
For these same customer segments, do you have any kind of breakdown on what types of plans these customer segments are most likely enrolled in?
We can look at that. That'd be very interesting. I'm sure we do. I just don't have that here today, Commissioner.
And my question would be, relative to these different segments, when I look at your total Evergy customer compared to those who are pre-enrolled, I suspect there's ongoing work being done to pull in these folks. When I look at your low-income customer base is of 135,000 people, and only 36,000 were pre-enrolled in time of use. I suspect there are some specific programs in place to reach these folks.
Oh, yes, absolutely. But just to drive home the point, 36,000 out of 155,000 overall customers, about 28%, and 155,000 customers out of the 562 all in is about 30%. So we're reaching low-income customers and getting them to proactively engage at the same rate, just a percent or two underneath what we are the rest of the population, the population as a whole. And frankly, I haven't seen that in any other program that we have. So clearly some of the things that Katie and her team and the folks at Connect did there were helpful in this case. That is what I have. I'm going to turn over the mic and the clicker to Katie.
I feel like we need to disinfect it. All right, so I'm going to focus on the outreach and education plan. So when we talk about, we talked about this the last time we were in, but we had several goals of the outreach and education campaign. Just to summarize them, first, our goal was to build awareness of the upcoming transition. We wanted to educate customers secondarily about the rate options and make sure they were familiar both with the structures of time of use and what time of use is overall, and then also the specific rate options for them. And then third, we wanted to drive customers to take action and select a rate. That's that pre-selection that Chuck was talking about. What you see here overall, that we're going to step through the details, is that we exceeded our goals, but we definitely had that trade-off, which was a negative impact to customer satisfaction, as we all know, as we've all talked about. And so it was really important that we had the surround sound campaign to reach customers, to cut through just the negativity around TOU, but get them to really reach the goals of education and understanding and ultimately selection. It's one thing to have customers just be frustrated, but we really needed them to be educated, given we really want them to ultimately change behavior in order to be successful on these rates. So, stepping to slide 13. Oops, sorry. Stepping to slide 13, we've selected just a few overview slides. This is part of the monthly submission that our team, it's a very large filing that we do monthly around our monthly research. And so if you have more interest in these slides, there are a whole host of them that get filed monthly. But really, when you look at this, we pulled the questions that directly relate to the goals that we set out. And so this is the monthly TOU campaign tracker that we do. About 800 to 900 customers take this survey every month. It is statistically valid with the number of survey completes that we do have. And this basically shows you from June when we started to October, what was the awareness of the rate options. And we went from 31% aware in June to about 98% aware in October. And so we felt that was a good illustration. As we look back to that timeline of the events, you can see a correlation between the timeline, the news media activity, and all the communication to customers as it really picked up as we got into July and August and September. We really saw awareness increase. Moving to slide 14, we asked a lot of questions about what customers believed to be true about time-based rates. And this really goes back to the workshops that we had and the conversations about really wanting to educate them. It was not just about selling rates, but really educating them about TOU and the premise of TOU, and really talking to them about what their role is in TOU in order to be successful, and the rates themselves, those structures, and educating them about the structures. And so these were several statements that we had talked about that we wanted to test whether customers believed these to be true, and that would really test their knowledge of the rates. And so these were several questions. There are a whole lot of other questions that we filed, but these are several of the more important ones that we think relate back to those overall goals that I mentioned. And you can see that awareness and understanding, more importantly, increased as we moved through the campaign.
Katie,
Yep.
I just have a couple questions.
Sure.
In the previous agenda presentation, you referenced 2 points, which I'm sorry I've repeated ad nauseum. Like, I'm tired of hearing myself repeat them too. But one was that customers don't want to be mandated or told what to do, and the second is that they don't believe they'll save money. On the second point, the data for that second point is demonstrated here by the last, well, it's like the fourth and third one from the last, those trend points. But the part on customers don't want to be mandated or told what to do. Do you have any data on that survey point specifically?
We do, and we do file that monthly. I did not include that slide here, but I can.
And I think
yeah.
the second point is demonstrated by the time-based rates generally lower your electric bill, seems to decline, which is the inverse relationship of all the other questions that trend up.
That's correct.
Okay.
That's correct. Yes, but we do file that monthly, the frustration over being mandated and not being able to stay with the standard rate. That's really the main thing that came out too, is losing a standard rate.
Yeah, I'm just looking for that particular data point.
Okay,
Thanks.
yep.
And to follow up on that, what do you attribute the declining belief that the TOU plans will not lower their electric bill? What do you, because your data showed and your projections showed that, 90% of the people would either not see any increase or they'd actually save, but over time, that belief was declining. What do you attribute to that?
Yeah, so I personally think it's attributed to, there was a lot of discussion within the media landscape about, why would a company do this if company, if customers really would save energy and save money. It was a disbelief as to why Evergy would actually do this. And there was a lot of discussion in the news, on social media, that this was really a money grab somehow by Evergy, and that there was a real strong belief that customers would not ultimately save money. And so when we were out at our events, one of the biggest things customers said is that they're going to have to try to stay close to this because they didn't believe that they would actually see the savings that the tool showed that they would have. And part of it was because as they looked at those annual savings numbers, there was a real disbelief as, you know, why would a company that's for profit do this?
I think the third part, that last, the one chart after that says time-based rates plans make your bill higher. The belief in that increased almost 30%. So you see people, not believing it's going to increase their electricity bill, also believing it's going to make their plan higher, all at the same time in a relatively condensed time frame. So you attribute that to the media.
I would also say, and I regret to say this because it's going to date me, but we started aggressively implementing energy efficiency and demand response programs in the 2007 to 2009 period. And if you go back and you look at the survey data from that time period, one of the things we just didn't understand is why customers thought that this was, a bad thing, that these programs clearly were going to cost them more. I think this, anytime you change what you're used to, and there's change, and it's covered a significant amount in the media, I think you're going to get this skepticism of a for-profit company, just like Katie said. In fact, I'll never forget. I actually printed it out. We ended up being on, when we announced our energy efficiency programs, we ended up being on the front page of the Drudge Report, and it's saying Missouri regulators approved plan for you to use less and pay more. Well, when you see a headline like that, and it gets put out on the Drudge Report and blasted to 150 million views nationwide, I mean, it's change, it's new, people don't understand, so it's skepticism. If you ask those same folks today about energy efficiency having 10 years plus of experience now, it's completely flipped. So I think there's an opportunity here to let these rates settle in, become the new normal. It won't be change anymore, and I think there will be continue opportunities to flip the script on this.
And so then moving on, this is just the question about recall about our time-based rate plans. And this just goes through and shows you the increased awareness about the specific time-based rate plans. And this is where we started to ask more specifically about the rate plans themselves, where several slides back, it was just time of use awareness generally, but not specific to the plans. And one of the things that we talked about in several of the workshops, in the few workshops as well as the meeting on the record, was the need to educate them about the individual plans themselves. And so we increased our focus as we moved through the campaign and moved into that second phase. And that's where you really start to see, when we moved into the time frame in August, where we started educating about the plans themselves and focusing more on those specific nuances between the plans. That's when you saw that awareness increase as well. Moving to the next slide, this slide really looked at the awareness that your electricity costs will vary based on the time of day. This was wanting to make sure customers, again, really understood. This dovetailed into the why. In the very first workshop with staff and OPC, we talked about the fact that there was a desire for us to increase our focus on the why and increase our focus on the actions that customers need to take, given that now the cost of electricity is going to vary based on the time of day. And so that increased, as you can see, as we got further into the campaign as well. This slide is an eye chart, but we've talked early on a lot about the fact that in order to get awareness in this short of a time period, in talking with the consultants that Chuck spoke with, or Chuck mentioned, this was a very short time frame in order to reach get awareness and then drive action. And so we really deployed a surround sound campaign in order to get awareness and reach customers. We really wanted to reach customers where they were. Heavy use of digital advertising and media relations, heavy use of billboards. If you've been in the Kansas City market lately, you've probably seen we have more billboards up related to this campaign in the Kansas City and then the surrounding areas in Missouri than we have for any other campaign in my 16-year history with the company. It's an effective way to get an awareness message. It does not drive action, so you don't utilize them as often. But it did make customers aware of the calls, and we did have the change. We did have customers anecdotally calling in who had seen a billboard on the highway. Those were some of the early calls that we got as we started deploying our awareness advertising. But we did talk about, as Chuck mentioned, there was focus in the workshops. Again, another change we made is to really increase our outreach to those non-digital customers and income eligible, specifically elderly. We reached more than 10,000 customers directly at those 68 events that we hosted. And the beauty of those events, really, one of my teams that deployed those events, they did a really nice job of not just reaching customers themselves, but also reaching those folks who would be the conduit to customers, so assistance agencies. They worked with a lot of libraries and a lot of churches, and they worked to figure out where are customers going to go to discuss and need information that are not going to come into Connect. We also had a full-time person at Connect that was meeting with customers specifically on TOU. And so, as Chuck mentioned, we did reach a high percentage of our most vulnerable customers during this campaign. We still have work to do, absolutely. But we did a lot of outreach to agencies. We are continuing to reach out to food banks, libraries, churches with handouts and information, those in the hands information for customers who are not necessarily going to use our digital tools. And we found at the events, one of the most important things to do was to walk a customer through the portal and show them how to use it themselves, because ultimately everybody wants that personal view of how these rates impact them. And so we stepped them through that portal one by one to make customers aware and helped them see with handouts and other leave behinds how they could go and get that information online. And we also stepped them through non-digital places where they would be getting that information going forward. Moving to the next slide, this is the online account growth that Chuck mentioned. So we gained between 20 and 25,000 new online account customers since July. And we already had about 76% of our Missouri residential customers actively on online accounts. We're a little different in that we actually only count online account holders for folks that have actually logged in the last year. We count that as an active online account user. Many companies will just tell you the number cumulatively that have ever created an online account. We only look at ones you only count if you've logged in the last year. And from an industry perspective, eSource says that roughly 60% is the average for utilities for online account penetration. So we were already at 76%, and that's a number that's really important, as Chuck mentioned, as we're talking about TOU, because what we know is in order to be mindful of your behavior and your usage patterns, you really need to be engaging digitally. Getting communication at the end of a month isn't going to help you understand that usage that happens daily and weekday, depending on which rate you're on. And so it's really important that we continue to increase our adoption, and we have an increased focus as we move forward on all of our communication. One call to action, even with our non-digital communication, is a call to action so that they can become online account users, and really selling the benefit of those online account tools to our customers. And again, we saw a pretty dramatic increase in online account enrollments since July, since we started really communicating about those online tools. And I included Kansas just so that you can see that that's not normal growth for us. So that's something that we're really happy about. as we move forward to the next phase.
Before you go on, you stated that you had a 76% online engagement prior to this. What is it after?
I can't do that math quickly, but if I add the 20 to 20, what's that math? 70 even. 76% of 560. It's 76% of 562, and then you add that. Yeah, I can't do it in my head. Sorry.
Bring down the 8, carry the
That's-
4.
Divide.
So moving on to the customer satisfaction, we talked about this. We are seeing customer satisfaction declining. We saw a decline in satisfaction as we were rolling out TOU. But when you look at this is looking at our monthly tracker that asks that question specifically. When you look at JD Power, we aren't seeing satisfaction decline, even though this is a pretty dramatic decline. It is starting to hold steady. And so we do feel like there's opportunity for us to see increases in satisfaction as we start to get into more of a stabilization period, and customers they start to get familiar with their rates, and to Chairman Roop's point, that a lot of customers will see that they're not seeing the increases in their bills that are dramatic like they were expecting. They're actually seeing the benefit that many of them will have on these new rates. And that will be a focus as we move forward, to continue to track customer satisfaction as we move forward.
So how do you select the participants when you do these surveys? And is it the same customer each month?
Yes and no. So we do send out, based on the demographics of our customers, we want to get a representative sample. And so we send an email out to, it is all of our customers with a percentage, making sure that the percentage is actually representing our demographics. We send it out to originally all of our customers with online accounts. And then it goes through Qualtrics, which is a third party. And it's the third party Qualtrics actually, they are the ones that implement the survey. And each month, it's not the same set of customers who take it. We don't know which ones take it one month to another. We don't have it down to the customer level. But the numbers do fluctuate monthly. And Qualtrics will say that not all, you have a majority of customers who will take it every month, but not every customer will take it every month. So one of the things that was set in the expectation of what we would discuss today is, as we look forward, as Chuck mentioned, we're about a week away from being completely transitioned to TOU. And so now we're starting to look forward to the next phase. And really, we're at a point where we have a stabilization period. One thing that we do worry about is over-communication. That can create real customer fatigue when you think about just simple advertising principles of reach and frequency. You can overexpose your audience when you continue to communicate the same message over and over again. You do need a greater frequency when you are trying to drive action. And in this case, because we were trying to drive enrollment, we were seeking a higher frequency. But typically, advertising experts will say that after you start to expose 10 times to the same message, you're starting to oversaturate your audience. Obviously, we have been evolving the campaign, but we have been communicating since June about the core messages to TOU. And so we do believe that we're getting to the place that part of that negativity that we talk about was because we were really communicating over and over again about what might happen, what will happen, and ultimately customers are just now adopting those rates. And so as we look forward, what we are looking to do is really focus on customer-specific rate plan education. If you look in that first section, rate plan education, that's where we're really going to utilize the O-Power tools. And those include the rate education reports. Those are paper reports that go to all customers. So not whether or not you are a digital customer, you will get those rate education reports. We will be sending out rate plan specific emails. We will be doing bill inserts every month that will help reach our non-digital customers. And then the high bill alerts, and the weekly energy coach. Those are one-to-one customer communications that do go out via email. The weekly rate reports go out every Monday. And then the high bill alerts go as you get in your bill cycle and you're reaching a threshold where your bill will be higher. And those are very TOU specific emails to customers to keep TOU top of mind with customers as they are continuing to adopt their rates and get more familiar with their rates. We look at the second section, which is the high impact education. In addition to general education and personalized plan information for customers, we do need to evolve the message to our winter communications for electric heat customers. If you remember, this is the segment that has the greatest chance to be negatively impacted by TOU rates. And so they need to be really focused on their usage and opportunity for behavior change. And so we are going to be communicating with this segment more frequently during the winter months. And then we also have additional targeted communications to our non-digital customers through direct mail. Direct mail is the most expensive form of communication we have. And one of the things we did hear loud and clear at the first and the second workshop is to be mindful of cost and to see if we could take our education and outreach budget down. And one of the ways to do that, the most expensive tactic we have is direct mail. And so we have very high open rates on our email, and as long as those stay high, not doing as much direct mail to those customers who are opening our email, but focus on the direct mail for customers who are non-digital. And then as we get to the period where we're starting to prepare for next summer, we have high usage communications journeys already in place that we've had for several years where we start to educate customers about summer and high usage. This is when we will also pick up and ramp up communication about TOU as customers need to be thinking about TOU as they go into the highest usage season, other than electric heat customers. And this is just another way of looking at, as we think strategically about our education and outreach for '24, we really are looking at what is the savings opportunity that is individual for customers, continuing to educate them around time-based rates, and educate them about, again, what we talked about, the special customer segments that are going to need more outreach direct to them. Commissioner Coleman, you mentioned that it's one thing to get the customers enrolled, but you still have a very decent percentage, a high percentage of customers that are non-digital, that are elderly, that are income eligible, that were defaulted into the rates. And so we need to be reaching them on an ongoing basis. And our team that's been doing the education and outreach, what we call them the boots on the ground team that did those 68 events, committing to go back and committing to be meeting with folks in person. Those meetings were very well received. And so looking to do those on a more frequent basis so that we're talking with customers and helping them understand and hopefully translating more customers to become digital, those who can be, to see the opportunity in getting more familiar with their usage and their behavior change opportunity. And then again, the rate options and selection, we'll continue to monitor the customers who are switching and see what we can glean from that data as we move forward.
How often are you going to provide, like, information to the customer on this is what your bill would have been on other rates, like a rate comparison? Are you on the best rate? How often are you going to be in your direct mail and in your email? Will you be including that information?
Yeah, so our current plan, those are the rate education reports that we reference, and those are the paper reports that do the comparison between your current plan and the other plans and what your cost would be on all of the plans. And we plan to send those out 2 times in 2024 to all customers.
Any, like, what time of the year, or like every 6 months, or late spring, early fall, or do you have that already?
Yeah, so we were looking to do it in the spring because there may be a call to action before the summer. And so that is part of our that high bill season journey when we start to educate customers. It will be a lot more timely in our minds in spring for most customers. And then in the fall, once we get through the summer and we're looking at more of those shoulder months and moving forward. Those are O-Power reports, and O-Power does suggest 2 times a year is what they suggest, and they also suggest spacing them out by about 6 months. So that's our plan. I don't have the specific month, but yeah. Moving to the next section, contact center call volumes. Just wanted to touch on, I know there was discussion the last time we were here about the call volumes that you all were seeing, the call volumes that we were seeing. And this really looks at the TOU calls offered. Those are calls that went to a live agent. And one thing to talk about, just to touch on, is more than 60% of calls that came in were contained by our IVA. And so this shows that this is not a total number of calls that were coming in. More than 60% of calls generally came in, were contained by the IVA, but most TOU calls needed to bypass the IVA and actually talk to an agent. And so these were the number of calls that were taken by our agents that were specific to TOU. And then when you look alongside, that's the average duration of the call. Obviously, in the months as we got closer to transitioning and defaulting, we had the highest, they're the longest calls, and they were the more difficult calls that the agents were taking. And then as compared to on the full right, that's the average of all calls. So you can see a TOU call against all calls. But we're starting to stable out, as you can see, and get, while we're still seeing in November more TOU calls offered, we're starting to come back down from a duration. And as customers are calling in to really look into their bills and have questions about the TOU, if they've been implemented, if they've been switched or not, or some of the general questions.
Katie, what's an IVA?
Yes, an interactive voice assistant. That's the, when you call in and someone's, you know, it's the call prompts that keep you from going to an IVA. It allows you to transact with us without ever talking with a person. Basically self-service within the contact center channel. Now I'll turn it to Chuck to talk about cost tracking.
Before you go on there,
Yeah.
the jump in August and September of the average TOU duration call, do you attribute that to a lot of the media and the distrust of just basically the general distrust of the information you're giving me is actually true? Because it seems like there's a big jump there, and then it drops down. So what are you seeing there?
Absolutely. So yes, and that goes back to the other question about the distrust. You can see the weeks that we had high media activity within those months, the spike in calls coming in from customers, literally asking questions from some of the anchor, intros into the stories, or very much the anchors reading into the stories or questioning whether the company was really going to allow customers to save money on these rates. It was also customers calling in that were not digitally engaged who said they got a postcard and they wanted to better understand the different rates as they applied to them. And so it was really more, they got a rate education report and then they wanted to see if that had changed as they were going through the summer months. But yeah, I do think that a lot of that, it really did correlate very strongly to the weeks that we had high media activity. Mm-hmm.
So just one more slide here. This actually was turned over as part of our September quarterly update, but we do have the requirement per the order to go through cost reporting. And in September, we said we were generally on budget and said we were going to essentially spend what we forecast we were going to spend on this. You know, as we went through this process, we got a lot of feedback to reduce cost where possible, to bring more of the implementation and strategic aspects of particularly the communications campaign in-house. We did that. Also, given the penetration levels we've seen now and the relative ease of the transition itself, the fact that calls are dropping off, we're going to pull back, as Katie mentioned, on the overall more mass media types of communication. So I would expect when we update in November that you will see the overall projected budget go down in this. I would add, however, though, that the most person intense and the most dollar intense communication on this is still individualized, printed, and mailed to non-digital customers. So to the extent that we're still focusing there and actively engaging with those customers, that just given the price of postage, paper, and just facilitating these things, it is the most expensive thing that we do. There's very little incremental cost to emails and to digital engagement, but anything that is phoning, mailing, events, those are people and dollar intense. Having said that, I still expect that this will be under the 12 million and that the quarterly cost update in November will reflect that. So that's what we have for today. We'd be happy to take any questions from folks.
Were there any additional questions, commissioners? Did you-
This is Commissioner Kokmeyer. Chuck and Katie, thank you for your presentation. It was very informational. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner.
So I don't have any questions for you. I've asked my questions, but just do have some comments. I appreciate this data. There's a lot of hyperbole, a lot of stuff was out in the media and stuff, and we're starting to see the real numbers. We're beyond projections, we're beyond speculations, and the numbers are coming in. Very pleased with the numbers. 155,000 people went in and made a proactive choice to what they believe was the best. You're growing your digital engagement. You're having a better educated, a more informed consumer. And I think you're right, Chuck, when you said 6 months from now that a lot of this is not even going to be an issue, and they're going to settle into the new rates. And I think it'll be fascinating to watch this as it moves forward. And I appreciate your anecdote about the change when you do the energy efficiency and what you saw there and what we're seeing there. And I hope that as we continue to move down and get this data, people are going to continue to educate themselves. I think it's great you're going to peel back on the mass media and go much more to the direct engagement with the customer. I think you get a lot less blowback, a lot less ancillary, things, and even the stuff that we were seeing here with the mass media. A lot of the communication and the complaints we were getting were from non-Evergy customers that wasn't even in their area in some of that. So they didn't have the access to the information, but it really is looking like when people have access to the information, they're making a choice that they believe is the best for their family, and whether or not that choice changes or migrates, that is to be said. But I think the data you're collecting is exactly what we were looking for. So I commend you on that. I know this is a data rich, and this is a gold mine for utilities across the country. So the more you're open with the data to share with other utilities on your experience, so they can glean. I mean, the fact that the experts thought that we were looking at maybe a high 3% of a choice, and you're at 30% in a short period of time, I think is going to change the bar of the conversation nationwide. And I think Evergy is going to be the leader of in that space, and you'll be able to really provide real data to other organizations that can help them choose what they believe is best for their customers. So I appreciate the data. I appreciate the openness, and keep it coming, so that we can actually see how this is working when the rubber hits the road.
Appreciate the comments, Mr. Chairman. I will say I agree. I think pulling back on the mass media is good, mass communications. I will say that despite the hit to customer satisfaction, I'm glad we did that. I don't think we would have had the penetration rates on just individualized communication because people wouldn't have been looking for them. when you are aware of something, when you're excited about something, and I mean that either excited as in good anticipation or bad anticipation, you tend to focus. Our CEO, he'll probably be mad at me for saying this, but our CEO is a great example. He is a digital customer. He gets all of the same mailings that everybody else does, and we had not heard anything from him about all of the individualized communication that he was receiving from us until this became front page in the newspaper, and he started looking for what he was getting, and then we would get daily feedback. So while I think there were definitely some ancillary effects to that, I also think that it's a great representative of when you're looking for something, when you're aware of something, it helps cut through the clutter, and all of a sudden you look at that email from Evergy, you look at that postcard from Evergy, and so now that we're at 98% aware, it's time to go back and focus on individual customers again.
And one other thing, if you guys could track, I was down at the Missouri Solar Association. They had an event and was talking with a bunch of solar installers. They said in the Kansas City region that their business just exploded. That the attention to, oh wow, it's more expensive during the summertime. And it made that solar value proposition a lot more attractive to people, which this was all ancillary data, but what they were saying is that 60% of their year was done in those 3 months. It'd be interesting to see on the net metering side. What are you going to see? What are you seeing in a tick up, and how much of this did drive people to recognize that, oh wow, I could actually benefit from going down this path.
I know that team's been busy for sure.
Any other commission comments? Well, I promise to give other stakeholders an opportunity to make any remarks, and I see we have staff and the Office of the Public Counsel present. Are there any remarks from staff?
Nothing from staff at this time, Judge. We'll be putting our responses down in writing.
Okay, thank you. Office of the Public Counsel?
If I could, I'll be very brief. I don't want to take up too much time. I do want to thank the commission for hosting this forum to allow for this kind of information to me, and I do want to also thank the company for being able to provide this information. I agree with the comments that were said by Chairman Roop and the other commissioners' questions, that this has been helpful to learn this information, so I'm glad that this forum was provided. It's no secret that the OPC has had some concerns, obviously, with how the implementation of Evergy's time of use rates has progressed. I think that those have already been addressed in other filings, and I don't necessarily want to reiterate them here or focus on the negative. Instead, I want to very briefly just focus on the future. I want to remind the commission, the company, and any other stakeholders who are listening that the purest and best use of time of use rates is hopefully to eventually reduce peak energy usage, and by extension, reduce energy costs and potentially capital expenditures that the company has to make, which should in turn lower customers' bills. It's obviously been a very important and difficult task to get customers onto time of use rates, but now that we're here, the focus needs to potentially shift towards helping customers best use the power that they've been given to their own benefit in order to find ways to lower their rates and, as said before, hopefully ultimately lead to some potential future reduction in energy costs or capital expenditures incurred by this company as we're able to shift more usage away from peak time periods. Like I said, I wanted to keep things very short, and that's all I have. So I look forward to working with this company in future. One second. Would it be possible, we had one question we would like to pose to the company. Is that permissible? I'm finished with my comments.
I suppose that'll be all right. Go ahead.
Thank you, Judge. My name's Jeff Mark. I'm the Chief Economist with Missouri Office of Public Counsel. I had a question for Katie and Chuck. A question that was asked earlier by Commissioner Roop, or Chairman Roop, regarding best plan analysis. I believe you had said that there were 2 filings that you guys were looking at, one in the fall and one in the spring. Would that be a direct mail to customers for best fit? Is that correct?
Yes, those are the rate education reports that Elena showed in the workshop where she stepped through what those look like. And those are, yes, those are the ones that go out via mail to all customers twice in 2024.
What about virtually?
Virtually, you can do that if you use the online tools, but you have to go in and actually use the tool. And so the rate education report will be sent twice a year to tell customers historically what their best rate would have been.
But the online tool, will that be updated on a monthly basis? Will it restated, can I look at that and say, well, there's multiple different options based off my past month usage? This is what I would have paid under option A, option B, option C.
It doesn't do it exactly like that, but it does demonstrate the different options. And one thing we could do in the December workshop is we could do a demo and actually step through what that is looking like online so you could see what a customer can actually see. It's not the same as the rate education report. It's not calculating, every single rate, what their option would be. That's the purpose of the rate education report. And the reason for that is because we're trying to present the information and allow the customer what we don't want is customers to be focused on switching every month. It's more, for most customers, if that's a lot of noise for them. And so it's more looking ahead. And so that's the rate education report.
Okay. I'd encourage the company to speak with Amber in Missouri about their Bidgely tool. We recently had a meeting with that company where they're offering that feature. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Yep. Okay, thank you.
And thank you once again to the commission for allowing us to make our comments and ask questions. I have nothing further.
Anything final from any of the commissioners?
Judge, if I may, we pre-filed our presentation in EFS. I do have hard copies if anybody would like one, but
All right. Okay, then I see nothing further before the commission. This time we can go ahead.
No, thank you, Judge. I just wanted to
Oh,
thank the presenters today for being with us. It's great information.
Thank you, Commissioner Holzman. If there's nothing further, then we can go ahead and go off the record and adjourn. Thank you.
Thank you, Judge.